Next up in the West Coast office, I'd see if they had me assigned to any story for the day. Let's say they got a blind tip. Attention, Elizabeth Taylor might be dying today. Well, I'd get in my 69 baby blue Volkswagen bus with the hand-tinted windows, and I'd drive up and park in front of her estate, discreetly tucked in one of the canyons. I'd sit there all day recording license plate numbers for every vehicle that came in and out of her compound. Then I'd call those numbers into the office manager, who in turn would contact our mole at the DMV. One of the names that came back was actually one of our longtime stringers. Maybe they had a legitimate job inside, and they just never mentioned it. But a more tantalizing possibility was that Elizabeth Taylor herself was controlling her portrayal in the tabloids. How do you like that? The Mossad guys who worked for security for her, bullet-shaped Israeli ex-Secret Service agents who knew how to break all 206 bones in the human body, would come out and they'd knock on my window and ask me what I was doing. I'd tell them, I'm doing the crossword puzzle. I couldn't have been more obvious. That assignment happened more than once. I used to call it Death Watch. Or, my bosses would send me over to the San Fernando Valley to Annette Funicello's house, Mouseketeer Emeritus and television's first consensus pinup, now debilitated by multiple sclerosis. My assignment was to knock on the door, and when someone answered, try and get a good enough look at her to assess her condition. As her thankless caretaker tried to maintain her civility for the 15 seconds of our encounter, I spotted Funicello across the room from the back, shaking in a chair. I excused myself and reported back that she appeared to be inches away from death. Somehow, these people are always inches away from death, and yet, they tended to live out their lives. But the one thing I discovered was that I had an affinity for crime stories. However much a reporter from the National Enquirer is reviled in places like Los Angeles or New York, he is a rock star in the depressed Midwestern states that make up his readership. In some small town, peeling a handful of C notes off the fat Chicago roll in my pocket with an unlimited amount I could have wired in on request, I could actually put food on somebody's table for months or satisfy the most vicious methamphetamine habit. So I would troll the wire feed or look up those atrocity websites. Dr. Dave, what were some of the good atrocity websites? The Ugly or
Rotten?
The Dirty.
The Dirty, the Ugly, yeah.
Didn't Vice kind of start out
Fuck
in
Vice.
the direction? No. But that was like they started as one of those sort of snark smut.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Who am I to talk or who am I to judge? I did a book that was essentially murder porn. Oh, well, anyway. So I'd troll those wire feeds, skim small-town newspapers for days on end until something caught my eye. Fetus snatcher, let's say. And then suddenly, I was on a plane that night to Kansas City, Missouri, driving the next morning to Melbourne, Kansas, population 429. And then, just like in cold blood, I was walking down a farm road in the middle of winter, 2 weeks before Christmas, on my way to Doorstep, the farmhouse, where Lisa Montgomery had returned just 2 days ago, having crossed the state line into Skidmore, Missouri, and cut the living fetus out of the womb of 23-year-old Bobby Joe Stinnett, who died hours later. She had planned to raise the child here as her own. When no one answered the front door, I walked around back. There, through a gap in the chintz curtains, I could see the remnants of the family's postponed Christmas holiday. A forlorn tree, half decorated. Unopened presents and stockings above the fireplace. One too many. One too many little stocking for the number of reported family members. The last one, a tiny red booty, half the size of the others. An image at once maudlin and horrifying. This was my lead. While I was scribbling into a reporter's notebook, a haunted man in a faded pickup truck pulled into the driveway and rolled down his window. "Can I help you?" he said firmly. "Sir, I'm from the National Enquirer," and that was all he needed. "Get off my property," he said, "or I will call the police." Well, I made the front page of the local newspaper that day. At a truck stop on my way out of town, an overweight convenience store clerk confessed to me that she had been pregnant a few years back when Lisa Montgomery had stared at her belly for an uncomfortable period of time. Well, that became my follow-up story idea. It could have been me. And her kids got extra presents that year. How do you sensationalize the already brutally sensational, I wonder? Well, I was up for the task, wasn't I? Or take the BTK Strangler, half a state away in Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah.
Now, BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. A kind of how-to mnemonic offered by serial killer Dennis Rader in his taunting letters to the press between 1974 and 1991. After a 14-year hiatus, he picked up the correspondence again when his guilt presumably got the better of him. By the time we were onto it, Rader had been pretty well picked over by the National Press Corps. So my assignment? Make him gay. Of course, this married father of two, Cub Scout leader and devout Lutheran, never exhibited the slightest tendency towards homosexual behavior. But this was not a problem for the resourceful tabloid reporter. First, I went through his roster of known acquaintances until I found a woman at a local university who was a lesbian. Source 1, proximity to lesbians. Next, I phoned the only gay bar in Wichita and asked the owner whether it was possible that Rader might have been there any time in the past. He answered, "Well, sure, I guess it's possible." Source 2, locked. And for source 3, I twisted the arm of a criminal profiler on call out of Alabama until he suggested that the BTK's father had probably molested him as a child. 1, 2, 3 sources, gay BTK. Well, it wasn't quite the UFO beat, but it was something akin to investigative fiction. The trick was to see how much you could get away with without being sued. And the Enquirer had it down to a science. Make the BTK serial killer gay. Make him gay. to tickle the shriveled out nutsacks of the National Enquirer readers in Mike Pence country. David Pecker picked a pence to punish some poor ponce for where he chooses to put his penis. You get where I'm going here? Let's take a poll. Does Pence secretly wish he could enjoy a long, hard, hairy, clean-licking, smooth-sticking cock embroidered with big blue veins, trafficking blood flow to that bulbous crown, spitting pearlescent droplets of glistening pre-cum into his own mouth?
What the?
You bet he does. Did I also tell you that I wrote for Swank, Stag, Gent, Hustler, Female Fantasies, and Hotshot magazines?
I never would have guessed.
Well, that's another story for another day in the gray zone. Anyway, I wrote probably 30 byline stories over the course of the year. I'm not even saying I was that good at it. I try for that sweet spot of the tabloid voice, overly solicitous, maybe even a little breathless, yet ultimately disappointed in the human condition. But I bet I hit it less than half the time. I suppose I could have gotten better if I'd stuck around longer, but for the most part, that was the rewrite guy's problem. The old guys there, they didn't look like they were heading into a happy sunset. Now, do understand that these old tabloid guys had some fun back in the day. Like when the original publisher sent them around the world to places like the Maldives Islands on unlimited expense accounts in search of, get this, utopia. The original publisher, Generoso Pope Jr., gets a wild hair one day and decides that utopia really does exist. And he's willing to bankroll an army of reporters to try and find it. You know, it's like, who cares what Generoso Pope was smoking that day? I would have killed for that assignment. How about you?
I would imagine that would take a lot of research, listening to Todd Rundgren.
Utopia.
Find utopia.
Oh, God. I finally hit a wall in 2005 on the Dermot Mulroney, Catherine Keener bust-up. Two mid-level stars, both consummate actors, married with a kid. They were filing for divorce, and on the strength of her left field Oscar nomination for Being John Malkovich, her second was for Capote, and it being a slow news week, this story had some play. I had enjoyed Mulroney's Celtic rock band, Low and Sweet Orchestra, once at the Troubadour in Hollywood. And I spent a charming half hour with Keener at Sundance one year, and they both seemed like genuine people. But I dutifully put a comment call into Keener's mother in Florida, and she answered on the first ring. Mrs. Keener, hi, this is Mark Ebner. I'm a reporter for American media. First rule of cold calling. Out in the heartland, you're from the Enquirer. With celebrities or their families, you're from American media. It gives you an extra second to wedge your foot in the door, if you know what I'm saying. Well, Mrs. Keener, I'm reading a report here that says your daughter and Dermot have broken up. Oh, really? Came a sad voice from the other end. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and they seemed really happy. I told her how sorry I was. You know, you seem like a nice man, she said to me, the only person she had to commiserate with her. I hope you do the right thing. I hope you do the right thing. I thanked her, and I hung up the phone. Then I sat there for a long time. this was my moment.